Let's bring in former Australian ambassador to Israel, now Liberal Senator Dave Sharma. Thanks for joining us, Dave. Look, there's no other way to view this, surely, than the US letting Israel down.
Look, I'd say this is a complicated picture, but I'd say that, interestingly enough, or strangely enough, both Netanyahu and Biden have a degree of domestic political interest in having a bit of a difference of opinion over these issues. But I think it is a change in normal US policy, but I think the fundamentals of US support for Israel, defence assistance, military assistance, and vetoing any hostile resolutions will be maintained. I mean, I think it is a change of position, but it's a pretty modest change of position.
You're suggesting that the difference is confected to a degree in order to serve the domestic interests of both leaders. The point about this resolution is it calls for a ceasefire. At least it also calls for the release of hostages. But how, in God's name, can Israel stop fighting, stop tackling Hamas, while Hamas still has people that it took at gunpoint on October the 7th?
Look, I don't think Israel can, and I don't think Israel's given any indication that it will. I mean, I think that the way to stop a future Israeli offensive, the way to stop a campaign in Rafah, if that's what you're concerned about, is to call on Hamas to immediately and unconditionally release the hostages and to surrender its leadership. That's still going to be how this war ends. And I think, someone said to me the other day, there's no point in putting out 3/4 of the fire. If you've still got Hamas battalions in Gaza, wherever they are, they need to be dealt with, because that's the only way that Hamas will be eliminated, and that's the only way we'll get humanitarian assistance in at scale, and that's the only way that we'll have a more hopeful future for Palestinians and Israelis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's astounding that that's not the focus. The international community should be demanding Hamas release hostages to try and bring this to an end. Instead, we keep the international pressure is on Israel to essentially let Hamas off the hook. It is extraordinary. I want to go to Islamist issues back at home, and we've talked before about the lack of action by authorities here to prosecute Islamist hate preachers in our community. The Australian had a really disturbing story on the front page today about a radical cleric, Abu Ousayd, who actually teaches kids sort of in Sharia training on Saturday schools in Sydney. This is the bloke who has said that the Jewish people are descendants of pigs and monkeys. He encourages people to spit on Israel, that the Jews should drown. I mean, the fact that we have people preaching this hate in this country without any action from authorities is alarming, isn't it?
It's incredibly alarming, Chris. And I think what we've seen throughout these last several months is a failure of political leaders to condemn this sort of speech resolutely, but also a failure of our institutions. And that's the Human Rights Commission, the courts, the police, law enforcement, to actually make clear what the norms and values of Australian society are. And when lines are being transgressed or crossed, to act to make sure they don't happen again. We've seen the police, obviously this hate speech has been reported to New South Wales Police. The New South Wales DPP has decided not to launch prosecutions. I still can't understand why, but if they think the law is inadequate, we need to change it, because what we're seeing is a sort of culture of permissiveness being created here, where seemingly this sort of comment just passes for normal now and entirely acceptable. And it's not only, menacing to one community, it's infecting a whole new generation of children now, because this guy's a teacher.
Well, this is the point, right? Why have we not even seen a prosecution attempted? Now, if prosecutions were attempted and failed, then you might look at whether the laws are inadequate.
Exactly.
But they haven't even been tested by our police or our prosecutors.
No, exactly right. I mean, no one's been arrested. I don't think anyone's been brought into a police station for questioning. No one's been charged. No one's had to lawyer up. No one's had to spend some nights in a jail cell if they're on remand. I mean, these are the sorts of things you need to do to deter future behaviour. That's what our criminal justice system is about. It's meant to be a deterrent, to stop people from doing these sorts of things. But at the moment, there is no deterrent. I mean, these preachers are being allowed to get away with this speech again and again, and the only kind of accountability they're being exposed to is the media reporting on it.
Exactly.
That's all, though. We're not having anything else being done. That's not good enough. That's not sufficient. And that isn't going to stop this horrific rise in discrimination against the Jewish community that we've seen in Australia.
Spot on, Dave Sharma. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for speaking up on this sort of stuff. I mean, we're living in a country now where people can go out on the streets and preach, chant death to Jews, and we do nothing. Except for people like us in the media complaining and people in the Jewish community saying they'll be discriminated against. The authorities do nothing. It can't stand. That's a failure, as Dave Sharma says. It's a failure of our institutions as well as our politicians.